The first time Adil saw the mansion, it was nothing more than a dark shape carved against the dying glow of dusk, a silhouette so unnervingly still that it seemed to be holding its breath. The villagers had warned him about it, their voices trembling whenever they mentioned the place, but the flicker of a lone light in an upstairs window pulled him in like a moth drawn to a flame it didn't understand. The wind hissed across the empty field as if trying to push him back, yet his steps carried him forward with a quiet stubbornness he couldn't explain. Something about the house felt aware, as though it had been waiting for someone to notice it again. The moment he touched the rusted gate, the air shifted, heavy, watchful, thick enough to feel on his skin. Inside, the mansion greeted him with a darkness that seemed to lean closer the longer he stood still. Floorboards creaked softly, not from his weight but from something moving deeper within, something pacing with an odd patience. Adil lifted his flashlight and watched the beam tremble as if even the light itself didn't want to enter. Dust floated like slow-falling ash, yet the faint glow from the upstairs window still burned, steady and deliberate, as though it were guiding him, or luring him. With each step into the foyer, the temperature dropped, brushing his face with a coldness too precise to be natural. The smell of old wood and something faintly metallic hung in the air. Adil felt the sensation of being watched settle onto his shoulders, heavy and cold, like unseen eyes tracing the shape of his every movement. He told himself it was just the emptiness playing tricks on him, but the house felt far too alive for that. It felt like a presence that had been starving for company, a place that didn't simply stand still but listened, breathed, remembered. When the door behind him clicked shut on its own, sealing out the last trace of daylight, the echo stretched through the halls in a long, hollow note. Adil froze, his heart climbing into his throat, but there was no one there. Only the house, silent and waiting, as if it had finally welcomed its next story. Adil's discovery of the mansion began long before he ever stepped foot inside it, shaped by a series of small, unsettling moments that seemed harmless on their own but collectively nudged him toward a fate he didn't yet understand. He had come to the remote village seeking nothing more than a quiet place to rest before continuing his journey, but whispers about a place people avoided, a house that swallowed its guests, drifted through every tea stall, every narrow street, and every conversation he overheard. The villagers spoke cautiously, their eyes darting toward the distant tree line as if the mansion might appear simply because someone mentioned it. Adil, half amused and half curious, assumed it was nothing more than local folklore meant to keep children from wandering too far at night. Still, the consistency of their fear unsettled him in a way he couldn't quite name. It wasn't until nightfall, when a strange, flickering glow appeared on the horizon, that the mansion became more than a rumor. At first, he thought it was just a lamp or a campfire, but the light pulsed like a heartbeat, slow, steady, deliberate. Something about the rhythm of it tugged at him. He followed it across the empty field as the cold wind tugged at his coat, each step feeling strangely inevitable, as if some invisible thread had already looped around him and was gently pulling him toward its origin. When the silhouette of the old mansion finally emerged from the darkness, it looked far larger than he expected, its windows like empty, watching eyes. But it was that one illuminated window on the upper floor that held him in place. The villagers had said no one had lived there for decades. They had sworn the place was abandoned, cursed, forgotten. Yet the soft amber glow insisted otherwise. Adil convinced himself that perhaps a wanderer had taken shelter there, or maybe some kids had lit a candle as a prank. But even as he tried to rationalize it, a heavier instinct pressed against his thoughts, the instinct that the light wasn't coming from someone seeking warmth or comfort, but from something that wanted to be seen. His curiosity, sharpened by an odd mix of unease and fascination, pushed him forward. The closer he came to the mansion, the more it felt as if the structure itself were aware of him, its long shadow stretching across the ground like a welcoming hand. By the time he reached the rusted gate, the faint light from the window seemed almost to pulse in response to his presence, as though acknowledging his arrival in a place where others had entered but never walked back out. Adil's discovery of the diary happened so quietly and so naturally that he didn't immediately grasp the weight of it. After stepping into the mansion's dim, dust-choked foyer, he felt an odd pull toward a small wooden table positioned beneath a cracked mirror. The surface of the table was coated in a thick layer of undisturbed dust, yet a single leather-bound book lay in the center as though someone had placed it there just moments earlier. There were no footprints leading to it, no signs that anyone had touched the space in years, and yet the diary seemed perfectly positioned for him, waiting with a strange expectancy. When he brushed his fingers across its cover, the dust parted cleanly, revealing a surface that felt warm, too warm for something abandoned in the cold air of the house. Opening the diary felt like peeling back a layer of the mansion's skin. The ink on the first page had faded to a faint brown, the handwriting elegant yet hurried, belonging to someone who had written with nervous energy. Adil read about a traveler who had spent a single night in the mansion nearly 30 years ago, describing whispers in the walls and footsteps that didn't match the rhythm of their own. The entry ended abruptly mid-sentence, the final word trailing off as if the writer had been pulled away or silenced before finishing their thought. Adil frowned, thinking it strange but perhaps explainable by panic or superstition. But when he turned to the next page, his breath caught. This entry belonged to someone else entirely, someone who claimed they had escaped the mansion after witnessing its shifting walls. They wrote about doors that opened into different rooms each time, hallways that looped back on themselves, and the suffocating feeling of being watched by something that thrived on fear. Again, the entry ended suddenly, the pen leaving a jagged scratch across the paper as if ripped away by force. As Adil flipped through more pages, he realized each entry belonged to a different person, spanning decades, each voice echoing a similar desperation. Their stories intertwined in eerie similarity, as though the mansion toyed with its visitors, pushing them toward madness or disappearance. The deeper Adil read, the more he felt a cold, creeping dread settle into his bones. What unsettled him most wasn't just the abrupt endings, it was the fact that some of the handwriting appeared impossibly fresh. Certain ink strokes were dark and glossy, as if written within the last hour. He touched the page lightly and felt the faintest smear beneath his fingertip, confirming that the ink had not yet fully dried. It was impossible, yet undeniable. Someone had written in this diary recently, someone who might still be in the house or who had vanished before being able to finish their final message. The realization made Adil's pulse quicken, and he felt the unsettling awareness that the mansion might not simply trap people, it recorded them. Adil first noticed the mansion's shifting nature in small, almost dismissible ways, the kind that could easily be blamed on nerves or unfamiliar surroundings. After closing the diary, he tried to retrace his steps back to the foyer, but the corridor that had seemed straight and predictable on his way in now felt subtly wrong. The wallpaper, which he remembered as peeling in long vertical strips, appeared torn in jagged diagonal patterns instead. A narrow window that had been on his left earlier now appeared on his right, casting a thin line of moonlight onto the warped floorboards. At first, he told himself he must have simply misremembered the layout in his anxious state, but the longer he stood there, the more obvious it became that something was shifting around him rather than inside his mind. As he continued down the hallway, the air grew thick and heavy, wrapped in a stillness that bordered on suffocating. Adil tried opening a door he was certain led back to the entrance, but instead of the foyer, he found himself staring into a narrow room lined with dusty portraits of people he did not recognize. Their eyes seemed to follow him, glassy and unblinking, as though memorizing the shape of him. When he stepped back and closed the door, the wooden frame pulsed faintly under his hand, like something alive shifting behind the panels. He turned to try another path, only to realize the hallway behind him had grown longer, stretching impossibly into the darkness. The mansion was aware of him, adjusting itself in response to his movements, guiding or trapping him with the slow, deliberate patience of a predator. The whispers started next. At first they were so soft they blended with the creak of the old floorboards, faint enough that he questioned whether he had imagined them. But then they grew clearer, thin, breathy voices drifting through the walls, calling his name with unsettling familiarity. Each whisper seemed to slither across the air, brushing the back of his neck like cold fingers. Adil spun around several times, shining his flashlight into every corner, but the beam only illuminated dust and shifting shadows. The voices didn't echo the way normal sound should. Instead, they seemed to come from whichever direction he wasn't looking, always just out of sight, as though they were studying him and adjusting their distance to maintain the illusion of being everywhere at once. With every step he took, the house seemed to change more boldly. Door frames expanded or narrowed, floors slanted at disorienting angles, and staircases appeared where empty walls had stood moments before. Adil's breathing grew shallow as he realized the terrible truth: the mansion wasn't disorganized or abandoned, it was intentionally rearranging itself, herding him deeper inside, tightening its grip one shifting hallway at a time. And the voices whispering his name were growing hungrier with every passing second. Adil's discovery of the locked room came after what felt like hours of wandering through hallways that twisted and folded in ways no sane architecture could allow. Exhaustion pressed heavily on him, his flashlight flickering as though warning him that time was running out. He had begun to move cautiously, almost mechanically, tracing his fingers along the cold walls to keep his bearings, when he stumbled upon a narrow staircase tucked behind a sliding panel he swore hadn't been there moments earlier. Something about the staircase felt wrong, the air around it was colder, heavier, as if the house was deliberately guarding whatever lay at the top. But a faint metallic glint caught his eye, a doorknob polished unnaturally clean, reflecting the light of his flashlight with an eerie clarity, and his curiosity, sharper than his fear, pushed him upward. The door at the top was thick, wooden, and locked with a rusted chain that seemed out of place compared to the rest of the mansion's decayed interior. Everything else had been left to rot, yet this door was reinforced, as if someone had desperately wanted to keep something inside. Adil hesitated, sensing a heaviness behind the door that felt almost like a heartbeat, slow and muffled. When he tugged at the chain, it gave way far too easily, snapping with a brittle sound that echoed down the staircase. The door creaked open, releasing a stagnant breath of air that carried the faint scent of old fabric and something darker, something metallic and forgotten. Inside, the room was lined with shelves, and on those shelves lay personal belongings arranged with unsettling precision. A child's wooden toy with chipped paint, a silver hairpin shaped like a bird's wing, a cracked wristwatch frozen at a specific hour, and dozens of other items placed neatly as though part of a private gallery. Adil stepped closer, his stomach tightening as he recognized names etched onto small plaques beneath each object. They matched the signatures in the diary. Every vanished visitor had left something behind, carefully preserved, memorialized by a force that did not mourn them but claimed them. The realization settled over him like a cold hand closing around his throat. What unsettled him most were the shadows. Even though the room had no visible light source apart from his flashlight, silhouettes clung to the walls, vague, distorted outlines of people caught in mid-motion, some with arms raised, others leaning forward as if trying to escape. They didn't match Adil's movements, nor did they shift when he changed the angle of the light. They remained fixed, trapped in their final gestures, like imprints left behind by lives that had been swallowed whole. Adil felt an overwhelming dread as the truth took shape in his mind. The mansion hadn't merely taken these people, it had absorbed them, leaving behind only the objects they once carried and the shadows of who they used to be. Adil stood in the locked room surrounded by the silent belongings and frozen shadows, yet he sensed that this was not the mansion's final revelation. The air felt charged, as though the house itself was waiting for him to understand something deeper, something it had been leading him toward from the moment he stepped through its gate. The whispers that had followed him through the halls had gone quiet, replaced by a low hum that vibrated faintly through the floorboards, traveling up his legs and into his spine. It was as if the structure was gathering its strength, preparing to show him the truth it had concealed for decades. Adil's grip tightened around his flashlight, though he knew it offered no real protection against whatever intelligence inhabited the walls around him. The shadows on the walls began to waver, not like silhouettes disturbed by movement, but like living memories stirred awake. They stretched, elongated, and slowly twisted toward him, their forms no longer frozen in the shapes he had first seen. Though they remained silent, their contorted poses suggested pain, fear, and resignation, as though each person had felt the moment the house claimed them. Adil took a step back, and the hum beneath his feet strengthened, pulsing in time with his rising heartbeat. His breath grew shallow as he realized the house wasn't merely recounting its history, it was presenting him with a choice, or perhaps a warning. The walls around him trembled subtly, almost like a giant creature inhaling. Then the visions began. Not hallucinations, not dreams, but clear, piercing glimpses that flooded his mind without his permission. He saw people wandering the halls just as he had, men, women, even children, each drawn by curiosity, desperation, or misplaced bravery. He watched them struggle, call for help, search for exits that dissolved behind them. He saw their terror as the house shifted around them, steering them deeper into its hidden chambers. Moments later, he saw the exact instant the mansion absorbed them, shadows ripped from their bodies, their last belongings left behind like trophies. These scenes didn't play out on the walls or in the room, they unfolded inside his mind with excruciating clarity, as if the house had peeled back a curtain and forced him to witness its hunger. Adil staggered as the vision snapped away, leaving him dizzy and trembling. The house had shown him its true nature, not to frighten him, but to claim him, to make him understand that it didn't trap victims by accident. It gathered them purposely, fed on them, remembered them. As the hum grew deeper and the air thickened around him, he felt an invisible force curling around his thoughts, trying to settle inside him like a seed taking root. In that suffocating moment, Adil understood the chilling truth: the house didn't simply consume people, it became them, their memories, their fears, their shadows, all fused into its endless hunger, waiting patiently for the next visitor to join its collection. As Adil backed away from the trembling walls, the entire room seemed to exhale, releasing a slow, icy breath that dimmed the beam of his flashlight. The shadows around him pressed closer, their forms flickering like dying flames, and he felt a strange heaviness settling across his shoulders. The humming in the floor rose steadily, vibrating through his bones as if syncing itself to his pulse. He stumbled toward the door, desperate to escape the suffocating grip of the house, but the moment he reached for the handle, it dissolved under his touch, replaced by a smooth stretch of unbroken wall. The house had made its decision. Panic clawed up his throat, raw and breathless, as he turned back toward the darkened room. The objects on the shelves rattled softly, shifting in place like they were waking from a long sleep. The shadows grew solid around him, their features sharpening, their silhouettes forming faces etched with fear, recognition, and a silent plea he didn't understand until it was too late. They were not threatening him. They were warning him. They had all reached this moment, they had all tried to run, and they had all failed. Adil felt the floorboards bend slightly beneath his feet, as though something beneath the wood pushed upward, rising to meet him. His legs grew weak as the humming deepened into a low, resonant growl. The air thickened, pressing against him like invisible hands guiding him back toward the center of the room. He raised his flashlight, but the beam flickered violently, illuminating only fragments, the glint of the toy car, the cracked watch, the silver hairpin, before the light sputtered out entirely, plunging everything into a darkness so complete it felt alive. In the silence that followed, Adil heard a single whisper. Not from the walls. Not from the shadows. From inside his own mind. A soft voice that was not his own, murmuring with quiet finality, welcoming him into the fold of countless others who had stood where he stood. His breath caught as he felt something cold and vast wrap itself around his consciousness, pulling, absorbing, erasing. The last thing he sensed was the faint rustle of pages turning somewhere behind him, as if the diary he had read was already recording his final moments. When the house fell still again, the shadows on the walls had grown by one. The shelves now held a new item, the worn leather strap from a traveler's bag, placed with meticulous care beside a plaque bearing a freshly etched name. And in the upstairs window, where a single light had first drawn Adil in, a warm glow flickered back to life, steady and inviting, waiting for its next visitor to notice it in the darkness.